Why do you need this data? We don't care. We just want more data. Against an argument like that, you cannot win. If that's the argument, if they're going to put tags and sensors everywhere because this is what they want, they don't care about the why. They just want more of it. The whole system starts to be corrupted at some point or another, however beautiful it is conceived.
This is a powerful topic. I want to share with you my conversation with Rob van Kranenburg, as we covered a number of interesting topics, starting from the origins of the digital twin concept, its first implementation, how that implementation evolved over the years, where we are right now, and what we expect will happen in not so distant future. But more importantly, we talked about the risks and challenges of our modern interconnected society and how the Internet of Things technology can be used for good and not so good purpose. I do believe that this is the right time to start that conversation. So please listen to this episode and share your feedback with me. Let's start with a brief introduction. You do something very, very important, not necessarily only for technical standpoint, but also from the policy making. So maybe could you give us a bit background of what you're doing, and we'll get from there.
Yes. So my background is not technical. So I studied languages and literature. And when I was doing that, going to university in Holland, in Tilburg, I basically wanted to do the least useful thing possible, sort of. But I thought, well, the least useful thing possible, at least at this moment in time, would be literature. So I thought, I hope I can stay in literature for the rest of my life and be happy with that. But this, of course, was in the 80s. And there were fax machines all of a sudden, which you could look at libraries in other countries. And there were things like Dreamweaver, where you could build websites and hypertext environments. And before I knew it, or we knew it, we were all building websites or building hypertext environments. And for us, this was very liberatory because we were able to click out of these environments we were able to click out of the book, which was this solid sealed object. There was no real base for solid understanding. Everything was a construct. And all of a sudden, this hypertext fueled that idea. So I started working in Amsterdam and teaching in a very small computer department in the film and television studies. And also working at another place in Amsterdam called the Bali, which I was working on media education. And then I went to a conference in Jönköping in Sweden. And that's where I saw and heard for the first time about pervasive computing and ubiquitous computing and ambient intelligence. And this was a program called The Disappearing Computer. And so I saw a group of researchers of about 300 people, very diverse. But they all seemed very enthusiastic about creating this kind of world that would overlay the real world. They were going to describe characteristics of objects and people and things, and they were going to tag them, and they were going to write information about them, and they were going to put them in a database. And they were basically going to deconstruct or dissect all these objects in different ways. To me, coming from literature, I was really shocked and upset because I was looking at a whole group of quite influential researchers with also quite a background, it seemed, because the history of what came to be known as Internet of Things around 1999-2000 goes back to the 50s, to predictive maintenance in factories and local area networks, and everything that is now called edge computing was edge computing at that moment in time, because they were doing all this collecting information and analysis of the information and trying to get feedback back to operations and machines in a local environment. I was quite shocked because, well, coming from literature or poetry and there's quite some people who are animists on the planet, millions of them, if not billion, I don't know, maybe billions, but let's say hundreds of millions, and they have very 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 personal relationships with objects, and also, for example, the whole notion of religion or of making things holy is something that humans do with objects, and sort of they create these relationships. And so I thought, if at some point all of these things are going to be tagged and at some point they're going to be read out, there will be a dominant interpretation of the relationship with that object. And I was wondering then who was writing this, because nobody could tell me who was actually writing the data in the databases that you would be shown if you actually were able to read out something. And I assumed then it would be the companies who were building the products, which was something that there was very little thought about. And there was also no thought about the governance of the system. And this is what we basically see now. There was also no idea that if you create a kind of large set of such databases, at some point you also create a kind of vision coming from those databases. And it's like being in kind of an autistic world. For some people, a green toothbrush is something very different from a red toothbrush. It's like another object. It's something that is just not resembling the object toothbrush. It's something different. So at some point, you can imagine, and this is, I think, what we see now happening with all of the AI sort of coming, and this is that the gaze from the network might start scripting, for example, things that are read. And as they are scripting things that are read, the fact that some of these things are alive or not alive may actually not be that relevant, because for the gaze, sort of, it's all about the similarity of certain things. And I don't know how or why, but I kind of saw all this in a flash, and I thought I got to stay very close to this group of people, because it's very interesting, and it's hard to beat. It's basically impossible to oppose this, because this will be the new normal at some point. And that's what it became. It became the new normal. And ever since, I've been wondering, how can we put this new normal to the best possible use for the most possible people? Because it's clearly something that's growing out of also a scientific need, and an engineering need, and a maker's need. It's not going to be stopped by regulation or rules, or it's not going to be stopped by power or in any kind of way. It's clear that across the planet, this digitization of things, of people, of objects, is the dominant paradigm.
I think that's very accurate description of the origins of digital twins and other topics that we're going to talk today. And you looking at it from kind of the outside, right? Because literature is not very close with technology, at least in my mind, right? And that gives you that unique perspective that you can see things that are not that obvious for someone that is deeply inside technology. And I think that's a great contribution. And actually, your contribution is your book about the policy making in the age of digital twins. And you described the digital twins origins. So maybe before we go to the book and to the policy making, could you share your perspective on how digital twin evolved from those very early stages, you said like database type of digital twins, into the modern days?
Yeah, again, I go a little bit back to my background, which is in literature, and then there's the notion of the doppelganger, of the double. That's also a notion from Freud, and Freud also talks about the uncanny, which is das Unheimliche, and that's basically when you meet something that is real close to something that you recognize, but actually is not fully. So this you don't feel comfortable, but you don't know why. And I think this notion of the digital twin has always been deeply embedded in the notion of pervasive computing or ubiquitous computing. I think it's only later that it became a goal, but it was always embedded in a vision of ubiquitous computing and the Internet of Things. So at some point you can understand it as kind of a total or a full virtualization of an object or of a person. Becomes more because it starts to basically act on itself, and the idea is that it's going to start acting by itself. And this is, for example, seen in some of the factories where you have an actual machine and you have a digital twin of the machine, and they are powered by energy, and it's possible to switch the energy flow from the actual real machine to the virtual machine, and everything stays stable. Sometimes I think we're going backwards to this entire situation because it's moving so fast. It seems as if we have already been here at some times because the technologies are so aligned at this moment in time. There's very little, I would say, real debate in circles of engineering about the basics of things. People are working on 6G, people are working on security, people are working on quantum, people are working on better sensors and refining sensor qualities in IoT. But there's not, like maybe in other centuries, where you would have real fights between scientists or engineering groups who said we want this or we want that. There's a huge alignment across the planet that what we're sort of doing now is creating and using the data that we've gathered from the sensors and from people and from machines into really large, actionable databases or actual data lakes that can be worked on by ever more sophisticated machine learning, and then now creating this AI situation all across the planet. All across the planet. It boils down to the crazy and beautiful TCP/IP protocol of Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn, who basically said in the 70s, we need a protocol in the world that just says pass on the packet. We don't need any type of control of people. We don't need any type of policing. We don't need any gatekeeper. We just need to go like wildfire across the planet and say pass on the packet. And this is what the internet protocol was, pass on the packet. I mean, it's looking at the way in the world, it may have been something alien, sort of. It could have come straight from aliens. I mean, if you think about it, or if you want to think about it, because it never happened on the planet that we would have such a global protocol that nobody could really control, and that was so pervasive. And this is the basis for why we had Internet of Things and why we now have AI across the planet. And so I think we're in a very strange situation in which in under 50 years, because I think the web is 1993 and then the protocol was 10 years, 15 years earlier. And now with all of the things that are going on, it's just incredible. It's really incredible how all of this has come to pass. Yeah.
Let me summarize what you just said for the audience, because you mentioned few extremely important topics, and I want to be sure that even for people with less experience, those are very obvious. So first of all, I've got huge respect for professionals like you that got hands-on experience, number of years of actually working and thinking about those solutions, because on LinkedIn and everywhere, like digital twin currently is just a fancy 3D animation, right? But as you said, that cannot be further for the truth. Like digital twin is a data structure with the metadata and actual sensor readings and logic that can act on top of that data to simulate future state or potential state and to take some actions. So this is essentially the digital twin, and you perfectly explain it piece by piece. And the evolution, like how we get there from the, let's say, kind of static data structure, adding telemetry, and later on we added logic. And as you said, AI is just a tool or feature, if you will, of that digital twin concept. It doesn't change anything, right? It actually perfectly fits into digital twin itself, which is, from my perspective, extremely interesting that you've got that concept that is pretty old but stays relevant, and with those new AI advancements, it's even more relevant than it used to be a few years ago. And the other thing that you mentioned, which is crucial, is the open protocol. Because when I think about the Internet of Things, I think about the ecosystem of devices exchanging data in order to deliver some business value, right? And that business value is the goal of the whole ecosystem. And without that protocol, as you said, that won't be possible to implement this type of scenario.
Yes, absolutely. The book was invented by Gutenberg, and it was 1452. And we all learned to read at some point, and we learned to read and write, or I hope we all did, because it's sometimes difficult for people to do, but let's hope everybody is able to do it. And then the first public library in Netherlands was 1918. So 1452, the possibility to read. 1918, the first library. Of course, there were other libraries at universities, but you still had to go to university. But for simple people like us, for the common people, if we ask, can I read a book in 1800, they put you in jail because you're not supposed to read a book. That was the beauty of the internet protocol. It's the same kind of huge presence like the book, but it got rid of all the gatekeepers. That's brilliant and beautiful, but it had some side effects. And because the book, like 400 years for a public library, that takes too long. But in 100 years or 150 years, they built schools. And there were some teachers, and they built universities, and they built sort of kind of formats of doing things well. But with the internet, we got nothing. Sort of, it just was there. And that was, at the moment, we see the problems that arose because if we have these three regions, the Chinese, the European, and America, it hit the American region in the notion of this entrepreneurial spirit. So we now have $7 trillion in the hands of 10 individuals, which is, I mean, even not looking at what's happening at the moment in America, just looking at the wave of connectivity went through the individuals. In China, with the party and with the politicians being engineers, so in 2010, out of 12 top politicians, 9 were engineers and scientists. So they understood if we do deep packet inspection, we build our bubble, and within our bubble, we control everything. We do infrastructure, services, applications, and the problem there is, although I think it was brilliantly done, and I think we all should do it. I mean, if we're in regions where we pay taxes, so that's where the infrastructure should also be, and the services should be there, and the applications should be there, and they should be in a bubble where the money doesn't go to a few shareholders, but stays within the public sphere where we can just reinvest all that money. And of course, the problem with China is that it was a good response, but there's too much distrust in the system. So it's really obsessive, compulsive on control. So this means that in the long run, it cannot be really stable because because you create all this distrust. People will not give real information, and so the whole system starts to be corrupted at some point or another, however beautiful it is conceived. And in Europe, it went through the people that are basically our leaders, and they're lawyers. And what they do is they write laws. I mean, and they did brilliant things by keeping Europe together in the past decades. And before that, we just had wars all the time with all these countries. So it was brilliantly done. But they couldn't understand what was happening because they had this kind of legal mindset. And if you have this legal mindset, you basically do not understand ontological change, or you do not understand real paradigm shifts. You just keep thinking, oh, it's going to be fine, I'll be able to add another. So that's where we basically are now, is that no region has had a real good, proper response to this wave of connectivity. And I think it's also because worldwide, the engineers themselves, the scientists, the builders, the makers, they were very busy making, and that's logical. But they also sort of did not want to take responsibility for the extra that they were building, because if you build all these tools, and you think about a digital twin, this digital twin creates something extra that you haven't really intended to actually build, but it creates something extra. And so I think the engineers should be, or could be, more aware of the consequences of their own work, of what they're doing, and take more control. Because I think if there's people who understand this situation, it would be fantastic. And I don't mean that they should all be in government or that, but they should have more influence, a lot more influence on what is all being built.
Let me comment on that, because being engineer myself, sometimes it is very easy to focus on creating that masterpiece, like that technical capability, right? Because this is what you are trying to do, this is your passion, so you put your whole focus to create that masterpiece, that functionality, that capability. But you need to be able to take the wider perspective, as you said, right? And think about, okay, this is a tool that I created, but that tool can be used in a number of different ways. And sometimes it can be used in a way that I never intended it to be used. So as you pointed out, maybe from the legal perspective and from the strategic perspective on the European level, those engineers should cooperate more closely with policymakers, just to bring those two perspectives together, because I believe that those both parties can learn from each other a lot. And I believe this is what you are trying to achieve. By writing your book, you basically try to fill that very dangerous gap between engineers and policymakers.
Yes, in a way, yes, absolutely. You see, yes, you're right. So around 2000, 2003, I was really shocked because I saw this vision coming. There were also people who were trying to stop it. Like, for example, Catherine Albrecht in the States, who set up a group called Caspian. And she focused on RFID, and she held anti-RFID protests. At one point, she went to Germany and she stood in front of the Metro supermarket. And it was very well done because there were only 7 people in the protest. But she made a picture, very good picture, and it just looked like there was a lot of people. And the Metro halted the RFID trials for 2 years because of this protest, because they were afraid they didn't know how big it was, what it's going to be. People may be thinking you're going to be tracked and traced, and there's spy chips on you. This was her message. So we were talking and in touch, and I was thinking, I'm not going to do that, because for 2 reasons. One is, at some point, you're going to be standing on a crossroads with a small piece of paper shouting to people, be careful of this and be careful of this, and this is happening and this is happening. And that's not really effective. And the other was that I was looking at the space, And I was also talking to companies and asking them, but why? Why would you want this data? Why do you need this data? And they said, we don't care. We don't care what data it is. We just want more data. Because the more data, the better our data mining, the better our predictions. And then I thought, well, against an argument like that, you cannot win. If that's the argument, if they're going to put tags and sensors everywhere because this is the what they want. They don't care about the why. They just want more of it. And then I thought, as like a historical moment or something, you cannot stand in the way of that. So it's if you oppose it, you'll be ineffective. So that's why I thought I'd like to. I wrote this book that was picked up by Gerald Santucci in the European Commission. He really liked some of the ideas. And I thought, well, if he likes some of the ideas, I can also maybe work in the projects and still have a critical view, still ask sometimes, not always, but why. And but also learn myself. And now, I mean, after 25 years, I'm very happy that I did that I didn't choose the position of we're going to have to stop this or we're going to hack it because it's like air. How can you hack it? You cannot hack air. Now I think, looking at the state of the planet, where we brought it, and with the climate change, that's I think basically our biggest concern. Of course, there's so many things going on, but we need this Internet of Things because we basically need to know where all the energy is and where it's going and where it's flowing. So we need this digital twin of the world, if you could think about that, which maybe looks like another spaceship because you turn the world into a spaceship if you have this digital twin. We need a good governance for that digital twin. So we simply cannot have individuals or people with large egos wanting big Ferraris or all of these things. Sort of that makes no sense. But we also don't need a kind of governance or government who basically distrusts its own, because I mean, and we also cannot leave it to people who will simply go on writing laws and having this overblown management. So it has to be balanced. In 25 years, I really learned how important it is and how we need it to basically know and capture and be able to play back certain things that need to be done. And I think that's the reason for having it.
One thing that you said is extremely important, and I want to underline it for the audience as well, that when you implement IoT capabilities in your company as a company owner, you've got the power and it is up to you how you use it. As you gave the example, you can track everyone, let's say, in your facility, in your shop, using your product, right? But that doesn't mean that it's a good thing. And I do believe that you've got the responsibility to gather only data required for you to improve the end user experience, but not to track the end user to the extent that you can upsell some services that the person doesn't really need, or even worse, to sell that data that you gather to some third parties because you want to get bigger income and advertisement will pay a lot of money for that data. So I totally agree with your point that having the capability doesn't mean that you should use it to full extent, because that will validate the trust of the end user. This is very, very important, and I'm happy that you remind that to everyone, because without that we can very easily go into the way that China did, that we've got full surveillance, because IoT allows for that, right? And we can create a digital twin of myself if we got enough data, and then you can predict my future actions even better than I am aware of it myself, right? So that brings us to very tricky territory in the future.
No, I fully agree, and this is also growing. So also companies and businesses are beginning to understand that this notion of data minimization is actually also something that's interesting for them, because if they don't have that much data, then the compliance that is on their part for the GDPR is very simple. They can show that they don't hold that much data. If they get hacked, there's very little problems or issues, because if you only have like one token for people, it may be very different. So this is something that we are also working on with a group of people, and we came together during COVID, because it was at that time, of course, people were panicking, but they were also suggesting very serious measures of QR codes and things and trace. So we came together, and we found the notion disposable identities. The idea is that we basically, as citizens, we would need to have self-sovereign identity first. And this idea of self-sovereign identity, I think, is very strong. It's basically saying that you have a wallet, a digital wallet, and in this wallet you store credentials that you get from what is now the state. So you get your passport is a credential, your birth certificate is a credential, your driver's license becomes a credential, your school diplomas become credential, and you can also build your own credentials that you need to have verified through third parties in order to make them really trustworthy. But the idea is that in a decade or so, I think we will all have these digital wallets, and we can identify ourselves with parts of the wallet. So sometimes you can identify yourself with a birth certificate, sometimes with a driver's license, and you just show the driver's license, you don't show anything else. And the beauty from that self-sovereign identity is that if you have that, you can create your own identities from your own self-sovereign identity. That can be a disposable identity. And the beauty of that, I think, is that if you now have the spider web, so you have the web of the spider is in the middle, and then you have the web. At this moment, all the threads can look at the spider, can look at you, and you cannot look back. You don't even know that they're looking or what they're doing. And this is because we went from the actual real world of the village, where you know your friends and you say hi, and this is the son of the baker, and if somebody is gossiping about you, you know, when you go and confront them and say, what did you say about me behind my back? But in this world, where with all this invisible connectivity, we don't know what's happening. We also don't have to know, but it's crazy that we do not know anything. So in this self-sovereign identity world, the spider actually creates every set of identity to every other service provider. So if I live in a house, we rent, and I pay my energy cost, all I would have to do is send a token to the energy provider, and I can pay a payability token. That's all this energy provider needs to know. It's all the energy provider needs to get. They just want my money every month, which is fine because I get energy, so they can have my money. But that's all. So I can go through life sending payability tokens to all these people with which I have monthly relationships of money. They don't need to know who I am, where I am, whatever. It's just irrelevant. And they also don't basically care. They just want the money. And of course, in the token, that if I do not pay, I breach the contract, then the token unlocks a phone number or an email or something, or a house address, because that's fair. When you breach the contract, then you can be, then somebody can come and ask you why you're not paying. But that's it. And this is the world that we can build, a world in which we as citizens are basically are in control of the credentials with which we can expose ourselves to people when they ask questions. And this doesn't mean that society will change and there will still be police and you can still not do anything illegal or strange. You'll still be accountable for that. But as long as you're not accountable for any of these things, there's no need to disclose any of this information. And when there is a request from the police or from any type of authority that they would like to see a credential, and then that is logical, and then there's certain procedures just like there is now. But I think the key is that we have to make sure that the spider, that we in the middle, we control every identity. And it sounds like a lot of work, but it's actually not, because you don't have that much of these providers. You just do it once, and then then everything can go like that. And I also think actually that these providers would actually like such a thing, because they just basically want the money. They don't want the burden of having all this information, because it could just get them in trouble. Because if it's hacked, they're in trouble. If somebody's disclosing it from inside of the company, they're liable. This digital twin, like you say, has become so powerful that we as citizens, we also need our own tools to have a little bit more agency, because otherwise we will lose all our capabilities to ask how we are viewed or what we should do.
You painted a beautiful future, I would say, where we are in the control of our identities. We are still keep responsible for paying our bills and obeying the law, right? Because it's not about us trying to hack the law, right? But we are in control, and that reminded me a few things. For instance, GDPR, once what was introduced, I remember that I had tons of projects because every company, to your point, got tons of personal data that they don't necessarily needed, to be honest, to provide the service. And all of a sudden, they were responsible for tracking that data, for providing a means for me to ask them to, first of all, reveal what they know about me, and then to remove that. And it was not that easy for them, because they just dumped everything into a huge database without really thinking how to use that data in the future. That goes back to your point that IoT generates tons of data, and some companies just want to store it, and they will figure out later on how they want to use it. But that puts them at risk, as you said, that if someone compromises your system, then all of a sudden they've got access to lots of data that you shouldn't have in the first place, right? As a business owner, you should really think if tracking your users really gives you the value versus how much it puts you into the risk if someone's going to compromise your system, or even just run a typical audit of your system, right? And they discover that you've got some personal data that is totally not relevant to the service you offer. So I think that is being able to create that identity, as you said, for that specific service provider and create this contract between you and that provider. This is a powerful topic. I would really love to see it coming. And from implementation standpoint, because it reminded me blockchain and smart contracts. Is it the way that you think we will implement it in the future, or maybe there's going to be some new technology, or because what's your point on that?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that I also fully agree with the GDPR, because basically what I just described is the ultimate case of GDPR, which is like purpose-based, time-based, sort of. It has all these. It's really GDPR, and then you also said, which is very true, we are accountable in this system because we want to build this for a world in which we live. And you cannot build a world on anonymity or anonymous. I mean, that's not a world that you can build. We need to be accountable, but we have to have the tools of this accountability in our own hands. That sounds like you're asking a lot, or like you're asking very much, but it's the logical emancipation of the citizen in the digital world. If we want to talk about human rights, and we should, and then they should be upheld in the real world, in the digital and analog world, but also in the world that is this digital twin world. And we cannot go in there with being like this spider in the web. If this is going to be achieved with blockchain, it's very well possible, but it may be also possible that other technologies are now coming.
Let's go
Yeah.
back to your book and to the frameworks for policy making. Could you describe a few ideas that you suggest? How can we improve the policy making in that digital twin world that we are living in?
Yeah, I think so. First, let me tell you, like a little story. It's like there's a group of kids in school, in class, and there's a teacher, and the teacher is slowly dressing herself up as Santa Claus. So she puts on the boots, she puts on the cape, she puts on the hat, and the kids are still happy and smiling and laughing and clapping. And then she puts on the beard, and the kids start shouting, "Santa Claus, Santa Claus!" So, and they don't question where the teacher went. So the teacher just disappeared in front of their eyes, like, but Santa Claus is here, right? So that's a bit the point where we are now with this politics and with policy making. The people in policy, like the 200-year people in Europe policy, like the economists and the lawyers and the people who did fantastic work bringing the harmony, they're not engineers, they're not scientists, they cannot understand that things can change quickly. They always move as if tomorrow the day is the same, and then they're just going to be, oh, there's just going to be this and this, and this meeting will be there, and then this meeting will be there. It's just, well, very difficult to get this type of intelligence to see these big changes. Of course, the last months and with the American situation, it has somehow changed. People are now talking about digital sovereignty. People are talking about strategic autonomy for Europe. I'm also reading a lot of mails and notes coming from Holland, and people are talking about having their own cloud. And of course, I mean, for us, that's a bit late in terms of realizing that 70% of your information or data is in some kind of either Azure or Amazon or some cloud. I mean, this was something that you and me, we put that on the table a long time ago and said, do you really want to go that way? But nobody could understand it then, nobody listened. Now there is some good awareness, and that's actually quite interesting also for what I wrote, because that's basically what I was writing. And I think there's two main solutions. One is basically we have the networks that we know. We have the body area network, where we have the BAN. We have the local area network, where we have the home. We have the wide area network, where we have the car mainly, and we have the very wide area network, where we have the smart city. And these are well described, and there's a lot of work going on in all of them. And I think basically what we need is like a PAN or some other type of network that we put over these networks, in which we build new forms of governance and new governance systems. So a lot of work's already being done. And I think that the catalyst for this is the phone. And that was the brilliance of Steve Jobs, who came back to Apple and then built the iPhone. And he said, in this space of flows, you only have basically one or two chances to grab the value. And it was true. The value was in the device, and he controlled what went in and what went out. He built the App Store, and in the beginning, he even controlled the telcos of which the iPhone would talk to. So now we're in Europe. We have 17 or 18 directives. We are regulating data space, chip, AI, edge, cloud, you name it, it's all being regulated. And I think all of these 17 or 18 regulations could be implemented, not asked for to all the big tech to be compliant to, if you regulate the one thing that they don't think about, which is the phone. So if we have a European phone and we distribute that to 450, 500 million people, then we can have an operating system, a native AI, our own AI, with AI Act implemented, running from the chip. We have the chip manufacturers, we have the ASML manufacturers, so we can do that. We can build our entire open source service structure because we don't need Google or app, because search and friends and shopping, although I really admire what they did, it's not really rocket science. It's also something that we can do too. We can also set up a search engine. I think we have several in Europe that are very good, and we just implement them on that device. And then we have a wallet, and at the moment, the wallet has to lower cryptographic tools in order to comply with Apple and Google and Android. So imagine we are 400, 500 million Europeans. We get a wallet, and we cannot have our own crypto ideas. And there's several powerful scientific papers being written against this. So if you have a wallet, and if you're a 450 million zone, that wallet should be hardware. It should be in your own hardware, and you should fully control the supply chain of that hardware. So where would you put that hardware? You don't want to give somebody a wallet. You give somebody a phone with a wallet in it. If you have 500 million or 450 million devices, the edge becomes the cloud. So basically, our primary cloud becomes the phone. And it allows us also to think about the debate that's now going on in terms of media wisdom, in terms of strong depression in youth, which also is partially caused by too connect, and this is all being documented. So we can give a 13-year-old a different image than a 16-year-old, or we can try to, the basic things that I'm trying to think, it's all very simple, is you have all these laws. Now we need to discuss with 10,000 partners if they would be so kind to comply. And all that we have, basically, if they say we're not complying, is fines. Well, there's so much money around, sort of like at the other end, that they're not gonna be very upset with having to pay some money. And with the current American administration, they're also going to fully back the fact that they don't have to do that, or that they want to do that, because they've already spoken about that. I think it just needs this click of mindset that instead of trying to get compliance for all these laws, why don't you implement them on your own hardware? It's not rocket science. We had a commissioner, Breton, and he was tweeting very happily that he or the unit had been able to get one feature from TikTok removed. So I'm a citizen, I happily pay my taxes, of course, and my leadership in Europe is smiling and happy that he got one feature from TikTok removed. So that's beyond, I mean, that's just very sad. This is a man who came from a technological background, who was supposed to understand the situation. And if this man then sort of does a thing like that, you think, well, that's... So I hope indeed that there's going to be a better conversation and discussion between the engineers and the policymakers, and the makers and the policymakers, and they should be far more in control of what's going on.
To your point, that hardware is already available. We can create chips both for AI and chips just to manufacture the phone itself. Software is also already in place. Of course, it can always be better, but we've got very strong foundation to build what you just described. And in a way, that phone would be the ultimate IoT device and kind of your own digital twin.
Exactly.
In a way, right? Because you've got that wallet, and that wallet got all of your identities, and you can use those identities on purpose, and you can transfer money, whatever type of money we will have in the future, right? Maybe that's going to be one currency, maybe multiple. It doesn't really matter. So I think this is very, very competing future, but that is kind of, almost as hard as to create the backbone for the internet, because you need to have all of those parties agreed on a common standard. And I think nowadays that, let's say, policy and legal is way harder than the tech itself. So we need to create that common understanding, and I believe that this is what you're trying to achieve.
That's it. And then indeed, so it's all about timing. So sometimes, for strange reasons, things sort of do happen, and so I believe that. And I also really like what you said about it can be, or it's an IoT device. Exactly, because we can talk to people about the phone, but we can make this into the most interesting IoT device with running messaging service and IoT gateway, sort of. That's absolutely possible. The last thing is, as I was in a group now, it's called 6G for Society. So I never thought about it, but now I read about this 6G and things, and this 6G is supposed to be around for 2030, and it would also seem like a very good use case to me, that it be like a 6G phone.
This is the easy part, which is technology. We can build that technology, but then it is just a tool that can be used by someone with good intent, or with someone with not that good intent in their mind. So I think we need to educate people and educate policymakers, as you are doing, that there are capabilities already at hand, but the decisions that are made today, they've got profound impact on our society in the future. Either you own your data, or you trust some third party will take a better care of your data than yourself or your government, which might or might not be true, but I would love to have that possibility to choose. Right? I want to be responsible for my data, so let's say I will have that IoT device, let's call that the phone, and I'm responsible for managing my identity. And if someone's going to steal that for me, well, that's kind of my fault, right? Because maybe I was too open in granting access to that wallet. But what I see is that people not always want to take responsibility for their own actions or their own data, even, right? They just accept the whatever terms they get in order to have some new shiny app on their phone without really thinking if that app is stealing from them or not.
I think you're right, and I think what we will see, and this is also maybe something that we can do, or others that find it, is we will get new intermediaries who will indeed build this identity for people on their phones. So you basically talk to people what's kind of the levels that they want to share with whom and what, and then you do it for them. You set it for them. It can become a new service, and because indeed a lot of people are not going to do this themselves.
I'm not expecting people to do it themselves.
Yeah.
Going back to that crypto, right? So currently crypto is extremely difficult for non-IT people in general. And I think that is a huge problem if we are going to create that digital identity the same way that is very hard to use by non-IT people. That will not grant you the global adoption that you're talking about.
That's true, I think. But what's also happening is that we get a younger and younger population. And I'm not saying that they're all savvy with this, but there's a growing group of younger users who are more familiar with this.
So maybe actually this is a good idea for your second book, because you've got a book for policymakers. Maybe you should write for the end users, right? Just to create the awareness. Yeah, I think it all goes down to the education, right? Because we keep creating better and better tools, but it is our responsibility, let's say, as engineers, to educate people about proper use and misuse of what we provided.
Yes, I fully agree with you, and it's a good suggestion. I'll think about it, and I'll think about it. Put it, yeah. Thanks, thank you. Yeah.
I do believe that you're the right person, especially because of your own story, right? That you look at it from number of different perspectives, and you see all of those connections that are sometimes hidden. You've got all of those years of experience that basically you can kind of anticipate how the whole digital twin will evolve in the future, right? Because you've seen it started from very primitive shape, like the data structure, where we are, what are the potentials for the future when we add that new mobile phone, that new wallet, and going beyond. So I think we need to open the discussion.
Well, that's a great honor coming from you that you say that. So thanks a lot. I will try to do my best, and I'll think about writing. Think about writing that. Yeah.
Perfect. So before ending up this conversation, if you could just share how people can contact you and how people can order your book, because I do believe it is worth reading by both IT and non-IT people generally interested in their own identity.
That's my email. So if people want to reach me, just send me an email, and I will send a link to the book. That'd be great.
In that case, Rob, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today, to sharing your wisdom, and to helping make all of us to build a better future together.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that. I'm very happy to hear that. So thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you for listening. Go to the thinkrex.com to find more materials about the Internet of Things domain. I'm your host, Łukasz Malinowski, the Internet of Things advisor and trainer.